for melodic heavy metal. Playing it heavier, louder, raunchier, faster. This is the Signals of Intuition.
There's Fozzy right there with their latest single, Lights Go Out, from their new record, Do You Want to Start a War? You're listening to the Signals of Intuition, your home for melodic hard rock and heavy metal. Tonight on the show, we have the guitar player of that band, Mr. Rich Ward, will be joining us. He's been the guitar player of Fozzy for the last 15 years or so, featuring WWE wrestler Chris Jericho on vocals. He was also in the pioneering rap metal band Stuck Mojo, so let's get him on the line right now.
Hello.
Hey, Rich, how's it going?
Great, how are you? Thanks for calling me.
Oh, doing very well. Hey, no worries, man. Thanks for taking the time out to do this.
Yeah, of course. My honor.
Excellent. Okay. I know you've got a show to do pretty soon, so what do you say we dive in?
Yeah, it'd be great.
So I guess let's start from the beginning of you as a musician, and then we can sort of work our way up to through Stuck Mojo and up to what Fozzy's up to now.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your early life. How did you get involved in music, and where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was born in Atlanta, and then I moved to Charlotte when I was really young. So I basically call myself a North Carolina guy. And I loved music growing up. My family was really into music, not rock and roll, but they listened to everything from kind of the John Denver to Gordon Lightfoot to all that kind of easy listening AM gold. So I listened to plenty of kind of that early disco era, too, when I was really young. And I really got into kind of soul music and that style of stuff, kind of the late Motown into the Doobie Brothers and that kind of stuff. In 7th grade, a friend of mine, I went over to his house after school, and he said, "You have to hear this." And he put on his turntable Screaming for Vengeance, and it was the first really heavy album that I'd ever heard. Now, of course, I'd heard, AC/DC and Ted Nugent and some more rock stuff, had kind of come into my lexicon at that point.
Right.
But Screaming for Vengeance was the first really aggressive heavy metal album that I ever heard. And I went crazy. Like, it changed my life. And from that point on, I just said, man, this is the coolest thing. And I went in with a friend of mine who lived down the street, and we bought a guitar together for $35, and we split it so that he had it every other day. I would have it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and he would have it Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And then we flipped the coin on Sunday. And then, I slowly kind of started learning chords and trying to figure out how to play songs that I liked, the real basics that everybody learns on, the AC/DC and Black Sabbath stuff. And then my dad took me to a pawn shop and bought me my own guitar after he saw that I had kind of stuck with it for a while. So he bought me my own $35 guitar. And it was a 1962 Fender Mustang. At that time, it was worth $35. I wish I'd never sold it, because now it's worth about $3,500.
Yeah.
It was funny. I never had a vision of ever being in a band or being a rock star. I just liked playing guitar. It was one of those things that, like, I like playing basketball. So you go to the park and you shoot hoops. That's what I did. That was my hobby.
Right.
And it was cool for me because growing up, I didn't have like any of these local heroes that were guitar players that were in local bands that, like, oh God, I wish I could do that. All of my friends were either into sports or were into music, but none of us like aspired to be something more than just like, hey, play along with our favorite albums. And I remember in 9th grade, there was a band in Charlotte. I knew the bass player, and he said, listen, I got a gig playing at a pool party and I want to try to put a band together. You want to try out? So I tried out, and obviously I sucked so bad that I didn't get the gig. But he asked me if I knew the lyrics to some of these songs, and so I was hired to be the singer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was my first, wow, playing a show. And the truth be told is, I don't really know if I was good or if I was bad. Again, when you don't grow up around, later as I started playing in bands, I was really jealous of friends of mine who had dads that played,
right,
or moms that played piano or something. I came from a kind of a non-musical family, so I didn't really have many influences. So for me, it was kind of a slow growing process, but it really just came down for me just loving music. And once I got the bug, I continued to practice super hard. I would take my guitar with me everywhere. It came to school with me every day. I'd play during lunch. I'd take guitars to the movie theaters with me and play silently with a bandana tied around the strings. And I was just obsessed. And I moved to Atlanta in 1985 when my stepfather got a job in Atlanta. And then at that school, there were some musicians that I met, a drummer and a keyboard player. And then I all of a sudden had this circle of friends where we were trying to put bands together, and we started playing high school dances, playing everything from Bryan Adams to Duran Duran to, kind of dance songs. And then the heaviest we got was the Scorpions or Loverboy.
Right.
But I learned the fundamentals, and that was the one thing that I really appreciated, was that I learned the fundamentals. That I didn't go from, I want to be a guitar hero, where I'm learning how to play Eruption, where I was learning how to play Randy Rhoads solos first. But without knowing it, I was just learning the basics and how to play in tune, how to play in time, what is pocket, how my right hand and left hand work together to create certain sounds. And so I got lucky in that, without any guidance at all, I learned how to, in baseball terms, I learned how to, get base hits and shag fly balls, first.
Right.
And then it kind of just spiraled from there. And my first real band was Stuck Mojo that ended up getting signed. And so I consider myself pretty fortunate that all of the little breadcrumbs that kind of led me to where I am now as a 45-year-old musician who is lucky enough to, ride around in a bus and play shows and make a living making music. And like I said, everything was really organic. I never planned any of it. I didn't mean to meet Chris Jericho and get in a band. It was one thing just kind of led to another, and just a lot of really cool accidents created me a pretty cool career.
So sort of, since we touched on Stuck Mojo, how did that band come together?
I was working like all guys who have long hair that were in bands or wanted to be in a band, who wanted to look like whoever the popular musician was at the time. This was in 1989. I got a job working at TGA Fridays as a waiter, because you couldn't really get a quote-unquote job unless you were doing it with long hair, unless you were doing construction, or you worked in a hair salon,
right,
or a warehouse, or you waited tables. So I could put my hair in a ponytail and dress up in the silly striped outfit at TGI Fridays, and you could work short shifts as a waiter, because I could work 5 hours and make $100, which was great. And then, you could, after your shift, we had band practice. And I met Dwayne Fowler, who was the first African-American musician that I had ever known. And he had dreads, and I just remember talking to him and thinking, God, what a crazy worldview this guy had. It was fascinating to me because I had black friends growing up, but not black musician friends.
Right.
So he was into reggae and funk, and he was listening to, Curtis Mayfield and these artists that I had never been exposed to and never heard, Brothers Johnson. And then I became obsessed with that style of music, and I started listening to funk, and he and I became friends, and he said, hey, I know this drummer who is this kind of jazz rock fusion guy, and we're thinking about putting a band together. Do you want to come jam? And then our first rehearsal was the genesis of Stuck Mojo, which was this weird, funky rock fusion kind of band. And then we had 3 or 4 guys who were kind of our singers in the early kind of incarnation of the band, trying to find the right guy. And at that point, in 89 and 1990, there were bands like Faith No More and the Red Hot Chili Peppers and all of these super interesting bands that were starting to kind of come out. And although I was a big metalhead, I immediately became attracted to that style of music because heavy metal wasn't the great powerhouse that I grew up with. You know, some of my favorite bands like Maiden and Priest were not putting out my favorite albums anymore.
Yeah.
And even Ozzy's records weren't as, like, whatever heavy or whatever it was that I liked about metal from 1978 to 1984 or 5. Like, to me, that was like my era, and it could be just because that's what I grew up with. So I liked that era of what those bands were doing, but I became fascinated with kind of multicultural music. And at that point, I had been fired from TGI Fridays. I don't even remember why, but just probably because I just wanted to play music and I would not come in for shifts. And my next job, I worked at Pizza Hut as a driver, another job where you could have long hair and basically drive around and listen to music in your car all day long.
Right.
And at that job, the guy who was the head cook was another African-American guy who was totally into music, except for he was a rapper. And all he used to do all day long when he made pizzas was just rap along with the radio. He'd have his boombox on the little silver rack where the pizza pans were above his head, and he would just listen to Public Enemy and NWA, and he was constantly rapping along. And I thought, man, this guy, he's really good. And I was not into rap. Matter of fact, I owned no rap albums, and it wasn't my thing because I was a guitar player, and I didn't really see rap music as something that, you know, obviously fit my palate at that time. And I told him, his name was Bones, and I asked him, I said, hey, would you come to our rehearsal and help our white singer to be more rhythmic and kind of coach him and give him kind of like the ABCs of how your rhyme patterns work and how that is? Because I'd love to shape this singer that we had into somebody who could kind of flow rhythmically as well as sing melodically. And Bones came over to rehearsal, and he started rapping to one of our riffs, and I looked at our singer and said, you are fired. You're in the band. It was the coolest thing I'd ever heard because at that point in my life, I'd never really heard like a hard rock band that had like a real rapper, not like Mike Patton or Anthony Kiedis that was kind of white boy scatting. I meant like a real guy who grew up in the inner city, who was pissed off, who had a completely different worldview as I did. Because my parents, we never talked about politics. I didn't know anything about politics. I grew up in like this weird bubble where we didn't go to church, we didn't talk about politics. Only thing at the family dinner table we ever talked about was, did you do your schoolwork, or how was soccer practice? You know, so surfacey stuff. So because I was never exposed to topics about social issues and government, I was fascinated because Bones was totally into it. And looking back on it, I laugh at like some of the things that he said because we were all so young that, you know, when you're 18 and 19, 20 years old, you'll believe anything.
Of
you know,
course.
like the government created some chemical compound to kill black people, you know, and they fed it into their food sources and stuff. I was like, oh my God, they do! How is this happening? But I loved it. I loved the fact that he was like believed in this conspiratorial subculture thing. It made for great art, and it also made for he was pissed off. And I'd never really been around anybody that was that mad before. Like, I don't really know if there's any good reason other than he's just totally pissed.
Yeah.
So being around him, and we used to, on the weekends, Bones would take me, and we would go to all black nightclubs. I'd be the only white guy in there. Hand to God, I was the only white guy. We'd go to Club 112 in Atlanta, who was like a legendary spot.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
Then, they played, and because it's mentioned in a lot of rap songs during that kind of like late 80s, early 90s. It was like the mecca of hip-hop and soul music in Atlanta. And there'd be some white girls, but it was mainly just like a completely different culture that I had never been exposed to, and I loved it. We would dance. It didn't even open till midnight. So we would line up at like 11 at night just to get in. And we'd sit there and dance and hang and listen to music until 4 or 5 in the morning. And it was the coolest thing that ever happened, man. I just, it was great having that exposure. And then a year or two later, I discovered Pantera and Sepultura and Morbid Angel and this extreme metal music, and I was obsessed with that. And then I married those influences with everything that I had absorbed from that kind of urban culture and loving the Chili Peppers and right hand, or Nile Rodgers' funky right hand technique. And I married it into, it's not like I invented anything. All I did was take things that were already in place and put them together in a way that made for an interesting soup.
Yeah.
Good or bad, it was interesting. And so we made a bunch of records, and it was so cool because I felt like I was proud of that band because we were doing something that was completely different from anything else that was going on at that time. And I felt like that band was a gang. And that was something that I always loved about that era of my life, is being in a band that I felt like it was us against the world. We rode around in a 1977 Dodge van, and we played any place that would let us for no money, and we would sleep on people's floors. After the show was over, we would just say, hey, we'd try to find some girl or somebody that was cool that liked the band, and we'd beg them to let us come and stay at their house after the show, and slept in closets. And it was the best learning experience ever, of just learning how to survive on no money and playing guitar. And I loved it.
So obviously, as Stuck Mojo are winding down the first time, you formed Six Speed. So how does sort of Six Speed and Fozzy grow out of Stuck Mojo?
Well, Bones, the angry frontman from Stuck Mojo, as we kind of gained popularity and stature and had some success, and we stayed on the road 10 months out of the year, he was funneling his anger and his unhappiness into some substance. And I wasn't really aware of it because at that time, anytime that I wasn't on stage, I was playing guitar or writing songs and working on my 4-track in the back of the motorhome or in a hotel room. And we were starting to kind of live separate lives. And it came to a point where I just realized, oh my God, man, his performances were different and the way he treated the band was different. And I started recognizing this wasn't something I wanted to be a part of anymore. So I approached the other guys in Stuck Mojo and said, hey, I don't want to do this anymore right now. I don't want to quit Stuck Mojo and break it up. I just want to put it on hold until we can get back on track.
Right.
And so I said, let's start something new. And that was basically the birth of Six Speed, which was that it was Stuck Mojo, but with another singer. Ironically, the guy that you've been talking to, Eddie Gowan, who is our tour manager, was the first singer in Six Speed. That's how I met Eddie.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Did he sing on, so was that the original version of The Way I Am?
Yes, it sure is.
He sang on that one? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Eddie sang Time and a Place, Around the World, The Way I Am, and My Way. Those are all Eddie songs. And so it was Frank and I and Dan Dryden from Stuck Mojo and Eddie Gowan on lead vocals. And as that band was gigging and starting to try to build our own following and build a name for ourselves, I mean, obviously, it's easier to not have to start from scratch in that you could always advertise it as members of Stuck Mojo. It was a little easier for us because we had a somewhat of a built-in fan base. We met Chris Jericho backstage at a WCW event in, I think it was Greenville, South Carolina. We were into wrestling, and at the time we were tape trading with other bands, and fans would bring us tapes to watch on the bus, and we were fans of Chris. And we met him backstage, and he said, yeah, I saw Stuck Mojo open for Testament in Orlando in '97. I loved your band, and we had a great conversation, and he was like, I play bass, and I sing, and I love music. And I was like, well, dude, we should put a cover band together. Because Frank and I and Dan had a band that had done 2 or 3 shows, and we called it Fozzy Osbourne. And it was basically a cover band that we dressed up in costumes like we were in the 80s, like we were Dokken or something like that. And we would have various guys from Atlanta, like the Seven Dust guys, or Butch Walker did a show with us. And there was a band from Atlanta called Double Drive. And so we would just be like a local Atlanta jam band playing 80s metal covers. So even though it was real free form and we'd only done 2 or 3 shows, I said, dude, you should be the singer for Fozzy Osbourne, and we should book a gig. It would be hilarious, be awesome, because Chris's pompous wrestling character at the time was the lead singer of Fozzy in Fozzy Osbourne in every way, which is like totally absurd and hilarious. And he said, man, I'm a great singer and I play bass. And we did the first show without even rehearsing. So we sold out 1,000-seat room because the interest in Atlanta for the guys in Stuck Mojo with Chris Jericho singing was obviously, the curiosity factor was high. so were we for not rehearsing. Because it was terrible. It was so horrible. Like, Chris has never really gigged in a real band. You know, he played in high school and stuff, but that's not a real band.
No.
We all played in high school bands that, you know, were fun, but we were pro musicians that had made 5 records, and we were playing with the guy who'd never really done a pro gig, and he was terrible. But he was also awesome. What he was terrible at was that he just wasn't refined. We didn't do a rehearsal. We didn't talk about this and that. It was basically just, it was all about the performance, and that side of it was amazing. We all looked at each other and said, this was really cool. The people had a great time because we didn't take it so seriously that we expected everybody else to. It was more about being like Spinal Tap and just having a real fun time for everyone that came. And this time we decided if we play again, we should probably rehearse a little bit and just try to refine the suck out of it. And we did, and we played a couple of more shows, and after the third show we played, Stuck Mojo's manager at the time, Mark Willis, who is still our manager and manages Fozzy to this day, said, I'm getting calls from record companies that are interested in Ozzy Osbourne. Would you be interested in doing an album? And I was like, original record? He's like, no, a covers album. Johnny Zazula from Megaforce Record had offered us a good deal to do a covers album. And I was like, that's so ridiculous. Like, I couldn't even believe that anyone would, like, offer us a deal, and they hadn't even seen us. There was no YouTube back then. It was just word of mouth. And without even seeing us or hearing us, we didn't even send a cassette. He just said, I'm going to give you guys a budget to make a record, and we're going to do a 30-minute mockumentary about the characters that we were playing in Fozzy, which we dropped the Osbourne because obviously we were afraid of being sued. So we just dropped it to Fozzy, and we signed with Megaforce, and we recorded a record and did a half-hour mockumentary that played on MTV like a dozen times, and we spent $30,000 on a photo shoot, which we hadn't even spent $3,000 on a photo shoot in Stuck Mojo. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Like, my eyes were open to the big world of rock and roll because I'm so used to living in a van. And I think it was just that Johnny Z had a bigger vision of what Fozzy could be, much bigger than we could. And the first record sold really well, and it was a great record. We got Andy Sneap, who produced the Mojo records the last few Mojo records we had done, to produce it. So it's a great sounding record.
Did you guys fly over there to do those 2 albums, or did you record it all and just have him mix it?
We had him mix it, yeah. So I flew over on both occasions, and he mixed it in England, but we tracked it all here in the States.
Oh, okay. Do you do that, like, do you have your own studio, or?
Yeah, well, now we do. But back then, we just had local studios in Atlanta that we had relationships with the owner, and we've had a long-standing relationship with a guy named Sean Grove, who used to live in Atlanta. He was an engineer, and he worked for Elton John and Outkast and Seven Dust, and he's worked for everybody, and he's pretty much the Atlanta engineer that, you know, he did Matchbox 20 and Collective Soul. He was the guy, and he just kind of became our guy, too. And I still use him to this day. He was the engineer on the drums and also mixed the new Fozzy record. So relationships are so important in this business, which is something that I've come to learn and appreciate, that the people that you build these friendships with and mutually beneficial artistically, you stick with those folks. That's why I've had the same manager since 1992. You know, people fire their managers all the time over stupid things, and then they get another guy, and then they're like, God, I wish I had the old guy, but we burnt that bridge. This second manager sucks, so we're getting a third manager. And then you got a band that are 7 managers into their career, and, you know, and they're lost because their manager doesn't care about them. They just want the 20%. It's a job to them. So then in 2003 or 4, after doing 2 cover records with a couple of originals in there just so that we could have some artistic input on those records, Chris and I had a discussion, and we just said, you know, the Spinal Tap thing is hilarious, but you can only tell a joke so many times before I don't really know that we find it funny. And at the time, we weren't looking at things from the big picture. We're living in the moment, which is that we're enjoying playing together as a band, and we just thought, let's make an original record. The 6-speed band at that time, we had lost some steam because we had gone through some lineup changes. In 2000, after 9/11, the record industry really receded, and people were scared of spending money because there was that recession. So we were kind of like, well, treading water a little bit with 6 Speed, and I think we had burned some bridges by being 3 lineups into a band in 3 years. And, you know, and it was just one of those things that the labels who were interested in the band, and we did have lots of offers. I was stupid enough to think that 6 Speed should have gone to a major label instead of staying in the indies where we were comfortable with Stuck Mojo and Fozzy, and we were waiting for that big Atlantic or Warner Brothers deal, and no, it never came. And so as those wheels kept spinning, Chris was wrestling less and less. He was like wanting to take time off just to keep his character hot on the show. He wanted to take, hey, I'm going to take 2 months off. Let's make a record and go tour a little bit. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And our career was slowly kind of building, and we were selling records, and everybody was enjoying playing together. So I focused all of my kind of original material on Fozzy at that point, and we did All the Remains. That record came out. We recorded it, I believe, in 2004, but it didn't come out until 2005.
Right, yeah, I remember the build-up to that record.
Yeah, it took a while to get that album kind of situated business-wise, because we actually recorded it on our quote-unquote own label, and then we just found a distributor to put it out in the States. And that record was received well, and I thought it was a good record. I recorded half of it myself in our rehearsal space because the producer that we were using at the time, Rick Beato, his father had passed away right in the middle of recording, so he had to pull out of the project, and I had never recorded anything. I knew how to run Pro Tools by looking over the shoulder of Andy Sneap and Sean Grove and Rick Beato, but I didn't know how to do it myself. So I basically just went in my rehearsal space and bought a cheap computer and a cheap interface and built my own quote-unquote studio, and that record suffers in a lot of ways because of that, sonically, in my opinion. When I listened to it through a critical ear, it could have been a much better record, but it was what it was. But what was great about it was the first time that I ever sat behind the controls, and I became the producer and the engineer and started learning, you know, the way that you do anything. You learn how to fix your car by fixing your car.
Right.
You know? And so at that point, I took over as the band's producer, and it was great. And then started putting more and more of my time and effort. I was still doing some Stuck Mojo albums. I did a solo record, so I was still doing things on the side. But for all intents and purposes, Fozzy was my main band at that point forward, where it was where I was deriving most of my income from, and it was where I was spending most of my time. And bring us all the way up to the new record, which was the first time that I had a sit-down conversation with Chris, because up until that point, I was kind of writing for Fozzy. So the idea was, with the exception of All the Remains, there was a couple of 6 Speed songs that Chris really liked and he wanted to re-record for that album. With the exception of those 2 songs, I think The Test and The Way I Am. Oh, actually, Enemy was a 6 Speed song too. So there was three songs that I had written for 6 Speed that became Fozzy songs. But for the new album, Do You Want to Start a War, I asked Chris, can I stop writing for Fozzy and just write what I want to write? Because when I'm writing for Fozzy, I'm kind of writing for Chris loves Megadeth, Chris loves Dream Theater. You know, he likes Halloween. So I'm like trying to create some things sonically and melodically that makes Chris happy. So because he and I are writing partners in the band, he writes the lyrics, and then I write the melodies, and I write all of the music. So then the idea is I'm trying to shape things so that it makes Chris happy too, because that's how you be in a band, is you try to find these common areas where we can say, hey, it's not exactly the way I would do it, but this is the way you would do it, and let's try to find that spot in the middle. But on the new record, I just said, dude, write the lyrics, and can I just write a record the way I want to? Because I'm a groove guitar player. Going back to the earlier in our conversation, I love the Chili Peppers. You know, I like ZZ Top. You know, I like stuff that swings, and I like simplicity and pocket. And I said, I've been playing with Frank, our drummer, since 1991, and we know what makes us strong, which is our pocket, and when we're locked into these grooves, just let me write that kind of record. And he was like, dude, write whatever record you want. You know, he felt like, wow, I didn't realize you felt so strongly about some of these other songs that I had been writing on previous records, that I was kind of writing for us, you know, or what I perceived as what Chris would like to kind of do. And I think the new record is the best thing we've ever done, because it is the most honest assessment of who we are as a band. And that felt really good. I mean, I love the earlier records, don't get me wrong. And Sin and Bones is closer to that natural state of who we are as players and as writers.
Right. To me, I mean, that almost felt like a transition record between, say, Chasing the Grail and the new one.
It absolutely is. It's a great observation. And it was me kind of being a little more argumentative in the writing process and saying, no, I don't want to do another fast song. I'm not a fast guitar player. I don't want to do these songs. It's like, this would feel as natural. And then I would say, okay, I'll do one. Okay. Or I'll do two. And then it became, and that's what being a band, again, is. It's about compromise. It's about finding those areas we can all agree on. And Chris did more compromising, to his credit, on the new album by just saying, dude, here are my lyrics. Use them to the best of your abilities. He wrote me 14 or 15 different sets of lyrics. And he always allows me to shape things, because sometimes poetry doesn't always work within the format of a song. So,
of course.
Just because the rhyme patterns don't necessarily always work. So he allows me to do that. And if he doesn't have a defined chorus that works, I'll write a chorus lyric section to a song and keep all of his verses. And it's the first time that we made a record together where we didn't really have terrible fights. Like on Sin and Bones and on Chasing the Grail, we had like really nasty arguments where I didn't want to talk to him for a few days. And I'm sure he didn't want to talk to me either, because we're both A-type personalities. We're both used to being leaders in our respective fields. He's been an A-lister guy in wrestling for so many years, and I was the kind of head cheese and stuck Mojo. So we're both used to getting our ways, and instead of fighting on the new album, we both just learned to just hug it out. and like I said, Chris came into it with just the perfect attitude, just like, let's make this badass record. And yeah, I mean, could you give me just one fast riff? No, I'm not giving you a fast riff. I'm only giving you a fast riff if I think the song needs it, And Witchery is his fast riff. That was the one kind of fantasy lyrics that he wrote on the new album that I felt like kind of needed that. It needed kind of more of an up-tempo, super aggressive kind of guitar approach, where Do You Want to Start a War, to me, felt like it was more of this street march anthemic kind of feel to it, like Public Enemy's Fight the Power. So I was going with that kind of feel to it. And there's freaking groove, hip-hop, funk elements all over the new record. And musicians will probably be able to identify that. But people who are just music fans, they absorb things and listen to them like without like trying to tear them down and analyze it as what is this. They just take it as face value. I either like it or B, I don't like it. And so I stand by this new record and say, man, I'm super, super happy with it and really love it because, A, as a writer, I didn't have to compromise at all on it, or I didn't feel like I was trying to do something. I was just being, and just being who you are and being comfortable in those shoes without having to second guess everything that you do is a great place to come from. And then secondly, I think the record sounds awesome, and Chris's vocal performances are really good. I felt like it was all of those elements that are important to making a great record are there. And feel great about it. And it encourages me to want to keep being in this band, because ultimately, anyone who knows anything about the music business, there's Nickelback and Slipknot, and then there's the rest of us. And the rest of us, we have to scrape to get by, because the music business isn't what everybody thinks it is. We make good money, but we spend good money because it costs a lot of money to have a crew and to have gear and to travel, just traveling expenses. You just think about the money that it costs to keep us on the road, and a lot of times it's a break-even, kind of prospect. So the idea is, if I'm going to do this, it has to be because I'm super passionate, and everything that we do has to mean something, and it has to be important, and to me, it has to be something that I believe in. Otherwise, I'll just get another job. I'll just stay home and play music for fun like I did when I was 14 years old, that same kid who listened to AC/DC records and played along, because that guy didn't care about making money. So I've always felt like the priority has to be, commerce is not my business. Commerce is the record company and the management's business. And if they can squeeze a couple extra nickels out of a tour without having to ask me to compromise what I'm doing, then man, that's a win-win. But ultimately, the only way I'd ever play music for money and kind of close my eyes to the artistic thing is if I was playing for some classic artist. So if Billy Joel needed a guitar player, then you're just a side guy.
Yeah.
But if it's ever my band and it's ever my records and my producing and my writing, I want to do it my way, and I want to be able to say I'm proud of this, and this is a true representation of who I am. Or I'll just get a job working at a car wash and then just play music when I get off from work. And to me, that's where I'm at in life, which is exactly where I was when I was a kid working at CJAM Fridays.
And so, new record aside, what does the future hold for yourself and Fozzy?
You know, I make a point of never looking at tomorrow. I don't even know where we're playing tomorrow. Hand to God, I just have no idea. Because I want to live in the now and in the moment. The band could break up in 4 days, or the band could go on to make 10 more albums. I think it's more likely that we'll go on to make 10 more albums, but you just never know how things go, because this is an organization that it requires 5 people to show up every day and be happy and be satisfied. We're a team. We're a baseball team, you know, or a basketball team. Nobody's more important than anybody else. I may take on a bigger role creatively, but I can't do it without these guys who are my family and my, you know, partners.
Absolutely.
And so you never know when somebody just says one day, I don't want to do this anymore. And then we have to get together and say, do we get somebody else? And what does that look like? And so I never think in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow. I think in terms of tonight's show. Earlier when I plugged in the guitar and I was tweaking my rig, I was so excited how good my guitar rig sounds right now.
What's your setup?
I'm playing a Marshall JCM-800 and a Marshall JVM. I use the JVM for more of kind of a thinner cut, more aggressive on the top end, and the 800 is real mid-rangey and it's got good body. So the amps both do something different. And I've got various little trinkets and stuff, you know, a wah pedal, and I'm using an old early 80s MXR flanger doubler as a little splitter for solos, so that it kind of goes to a little bit of a wet feel where the left side slightly delayed. So it gets super thick and creamy, and to me, like, that's the payoff. Like, standing in front, there are very few guys that I think have better guitar tone than me, and that's not because I didn't make Marshalls. I just buy them, and I have figured out a way based on the way that I play guitar, because every guitar player is different. When Stuck Mojo toured with Pantera, Dime was always flipping out on my guitar sounds that he plugged in, and it didn't sound like him.
Yeah,
it sounded weird. Like, he was like, how do you play through this? It sounds like crap. And then I plug into it, it's like, damn. And same thing, I plugged into his rig, and it sounded terrible. And you just have to find the right guitar, the right pickups, and the speakers are the big thing. I use these, English greenbacks, 25-watt greenbacks, and they work for me. Zach Wilde uses high wattage EVs. So does Joe Bonamassa. I hate those speakers, but they work great for those guys.
Of course.
When I play through them, I just like, oh, God, it's terrible. And the best advice you could give to any guitar player is that you just have to find what works for you. It's like a pair of shoes. Just because they look good on that dude doesn't mean they're going to work for you. And with guitar, there's so many variables. I just bought a new Bob Bradshaw switcher that I use to split my signal for using multiple amps, because I'm also running a temper for a direct signal for the console, so that if the front of house needs something that's a little more aggressive and direct, they can sneak a little bit of that signal in there. But then you're running 3 guitars, so you're running into possible phasing issues. And so all of my components have to be super high dollar, where I have isolated transformers for all the outputs, making sure there's no phasing issues. And we have the time delay, the Kemper. Like I say, it's a big process, but I could just play with one JCM-800 and one greenback loaded Marshall cab and using my 1976 Gibson Les Paul standard, and I'd still have great tone. But as somebody who, my heroes had big rigs, and the more elements that I can add, it's like having more crayons in the box. More colors, the better. And if I can have a little more width and a little bit more sonic depth and variables, because one amp can't do everything. This amp is set to do this. This amp is set to do that. so that when they come together, the blend is bigger than when they're run individually. And yes, I'm super into that guitar tone thing. That's the thing, is like, I have a wife. I'm not a big chick dude. Like, there are some dudes who, that are into their girls on the road. I've never been that dude. I don't care. I've always been a one-woman dude. And I don't drink and I don't party. All I care about is putting on the best show I can. I just did an hour of yoga before I talked to you to get my workout in, because I want to be in the best shape. I'm 45. Like, I want to be in better shape than the 22-year-old kid from some new up-and-coming band. And I'm going to have better tone than him, and I'm going to be in better shape. And that's my goal. I want to be the Terminator. I want to be, you can't kill me. And that's, otherwise just go home, right? If you don't want to be Barry Bonds, then why even bother playing baseball?
Right.
That's what Chris is 5'10", and he weighs 210 pounds. He should have never been the heavyweight champion 6 times in a row, especially in the early 2000s, when all of the heavyweight champs were big guys, like The Rock and Austin and Triple H. All of those guys were big dudes. But Chris said, hey, I want to be the biggest star in wrestling. And he wouldn't settle for anything less, which is why I like being in a band with him. Because he wants to play main stage at Downloads in England. I was like, dude, that's what AC/DC does. Yeah, I want to do that. Oh, okay, cool. It's like, he's like, well, if we're not planning on winning the World Series, why are we playing? I don't think in terms of success that way, but I do think in terms of personal stuff that way. Like, I can't control if we're the headliner at Download. I can't control if I'm in shape, if I practice 2 hours per day before the show, if I'm, my guitar rig sounds great. Those are things I can control. So those are the things I focus on. And that goes back to your question of what do I see myself in the future? I have no idea. I just want to be the best Rich Ward every day of my life at this moment. And tomorrow I'll work hard to continue that process and just take it, a step at a time.
Did you think we'll see a live album or DVD from Fozzy?
Probably so. I think part of the reason why we haven't done it is that, more than anything, there's pressure from the industry to keep putting out current albums that have singles on them, so that you've got something to work to radio and you've got a video to work on YouTube, and keeping new content out there. So for a band like us, who is still fighting in the middle class rock band world, slug it out in the clubs and putting out records, I think it's important for us to continue to put out new material. I think we should make a live record. We're a great live band, and I think that will come, but as of today, there are no plans.
And is it true there's another Stuck Mojo album in the works?
There probably will be one. We haven't gone in writing yet. We're doing a reunion show with the classic Pig Walk Rising lineup. And I think and that's with Bones, and we've had 3 meetings, and he's doing great. He looks great. We're getting along great. And so far, knock on wood, he seems like he's dealt with all of his demons, and he's sorted that part of his life out that I feel like is a block for me to move forward with him. So I'm feeling good about it. But I don't want to commit to making a new record until we've had the show, and I know that it's real, and that we're as good a band as I know that we are. So, and I also have 4 other partners in in Fozzy that obviously are wanting to tour and stuff. So I need to be mindful and respectful to everything, not only the guys in Stuck Mojo, but also to my Fozzy family, and make sure that if I'm working on Stuck Mojo, it's because Chris is back in the WWE doing a little short run, which he does from time to time. And that works out good for me. That way he's working on something else, and I can do the same.
Okay, so Rich, I know obviously you got to run. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time out to do the interview and to extend it this long. Super cool.
Yeah, of course. It's so funny because my guitar tech just went on the bus and looked at me, pointed at his watch, and did the shrug shoulder. It's perfect. So, hey, this worked out great. I didn't even get the you're a bad boy until now. So it's perfect. Thank you, Brandon, so much for taking the time with me.
Oh, man, I just want to tell you, just off the record, I'm a fellow guitar player, and I've got to tell you, you've been a huge influence on me over the years. Tone and playing, and
thanks, man. Thank you so much.
I'll just tell you, I put in a lot of time back in the day before internet tabs and everything were what they were, trying to learn End of Days and To Kill a Stranger. So I just want to thank you for the years of great music.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, brother. I appreciate it. That's really nice of you to say so. All right, Brandon. You take care of yourself, man. Thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Maybe next time we're in the area.
All right, Rich. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it again.
Yeah,
All right. Take it easy. Bye-bye.